All right. Hello.
It
First
is.
of all, a couple of things, a couple of congratulations. First of all, I'm Todd London, and we know who you are. You're Carlyle Brown, playwright. Um, I want to, first of all, thank you for this really beautiful play. I know we'll talk about it, but it really speaks to our world today really powerfly. Um, and it's really just gorgeous and interesting in so many ways. And I had a chance to revisit it, having seen a reading of it when you won the Distinguished Playwright Award at the William Inge Festival a
Yeah.
couple of years ago. Um, so I want to congratulate you on that before we start talking. And I also really want to congratulate you on your new residency as part of the Andrew W. Mellon National Playwrights Residency Program with our hosts today, the Illusion Theater. Super exciting, 3 years of full-time salary and production support and the whole Megillah, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. When did you start?
Well, I started, just a couple of months ago. Well, it seems like it was just really kind of a continuation of the relationship that, like, I already had with Illusion.
Yeah.
So we already had some history. You know,
Mhm.
I had a play that I was producing, with Carlyle Brown and Company. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
had up until now, I had this period of time where I was producing my own work.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the recent plays was a play called Finding Fish, which was about, the environment, about the status of the fish in our oceans. And it
Uh-huh.
was a futuristic play. And, I'd raised money for it, and I was going to do it at the Dowling Studio at the Guthrie.
Uh-huh.
And that sort of intersected when Joe Dowling retired and Joe Hodge came in, and he had a totally different idea of what he wanted to do with the studio theater.
I see.
So we were suddenly out of a venue, and of course the guarantee, which would help us do the production. So my good friend and colleague, lighting designer Mike Wong, and was uh, doing a show at Illusion, and he mentioned to Bonnie and Michael the pickle I was in. And, they approached me, and we ended up producing the show together.
Hmm. That's beautiful.
And then, shortly after that, my wife Barb, she had a stroke, and I needed a way to, make a living. And I had a solo show called Acting Black, which Bonnie and Michael presented at Illusion and spread it around to their extensive social justice network. And I started getting gigs doing Acting Black, um, in numerous places. Um, and then, following on the process of, you know, Barb and I dealing with a stroke, we had an idea to write a play, put a play together about, our experience, or as a
Mhm.
way, one, for us to, she had aphasia, so as a way for us to communicate to each other about kind of the essential issues that we were going through.
Yeah.
Her having been my, dramaturg, and
Forever. Yeah.
that, yeah, forever, right? And so, um, and so Bonnie and Michael, they, decided they wanted to develop, and produce, that. So it was then after that that we, had this relationship with the Mellon
That's fantastic.
Foundation grant. So
Yeah.
we had a hell of a head start, I say.
That's fantastic. No, that's the way it should be. I mean, this is the third cycle, I think, of the grants, and it's such an important program. And I've been a fan of Illusion for too long, 35 years, I think I've known those guys or something like it. So, and I've been your fan your biggest fan in a
You
really
are.
creepy way.
You
Yeah.
are.
So great. Congratulations. Let's talk
Thanks.
about that in Mississippi, which again is it's really meaningful to re-engage with it, especially now. I guess I want to start by asking kind of pre-Genesis questions about it. In the first speech, Jimmy talks about sort of two events that, catalyzed his thinking about coming south and working in Freedom Summer with SNCC, with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, one being Emmett Till's murder, and the other being a young girl integrating New Orleans schools, which I take to be Ruby Bridges. He doesn't
Yes.
name her, I think. So I guess it made me wonder, like, where was Carlyle in '64? Is there some of you in that thinking, or is that just a historical moment? What was going on for you in 1964?
Oh yeah, well that was certainly like a moment that I lived in. I'm thinking like in 1964, I was like in January 1964, I had a track scholarship to Kentucky State College, and the reason that I was there is that's a whole other story. But I had a track scholarship there, and so in 1964, I think there was a lot of always there were conversations in my home. My grandfather was a Garveyite. He even had a ticket on the Black Star Line. He was my step grandfather, and his son, was a Black Muslim. And so there was always, I thought that all Black people, had that conversation in their homes, like, what are we going to do? How do we live in this situation? So
there wasn't a moment, there wasn't like a moment of awakening to the South. You were in New York. Where were you when you were?
Yeah, like I lived in New York, but I would say that there wasn't really, that was kind of a constant, but, I would say that, 1964 was critically sort of different. The thing that I was near to in proximity going to Kentucky State College was Selma.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was a Black college, and people were getting, recruiting buses, and activists were everywhere getting people to go to Selma.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on a track scholarship, and I was going to get on one of those buses, and my coach, Coach Taylor, got on the bus and said, "Hey, we didn't pay you here to do that," and I kind of look back on that as thinking that, like, I didn't really have enough, really consciousness at that time to say, like, well, fuck you.
Right, I'm doing.
You know what I mean? I wasn't.
Yeah.
I wasn't. But that was certainly like calm. So I wasn't really there enough to be involved in, that Mississippi Freedom Summer.
Yeah.
But that was like, in really everybody's consciousness, as well. I mean, 64 was, really critical in so many ways in terms of civil rights movement.
And you were kind of the age of the characters in the play, because they're all in college at that moment.
Yes, yes.
And was that your first a trip south? Was that the first time you were gonna like live in the South, to go to Kentucky State?
Well, yeah. Well, my family was from South Carolina, so I had been. And when I arrived in New York City, I was like sort of 5 years old. So somewhere around when I was like maybe 10 years old, they went back to the South. And that's, again, a whole nother story about the conflicting connections of people in the South who leave to go north, and what that does to their, relationships to, what they consider home, and those kinds of people. You know, I existed in that kind of generation, which is large, like that particular migration where people are like really conflicted about the choice they made, about,
Sure.
you know, like where they lived, it sucked, but that was their home,
Right.
you know? And so now, now they were in exile. You know, it's domestic. People don't look at it that way, but I feel like, that's the kind of conversations my family, that's the way they spoke.
Right.
As I look back, that's not really something I was aware of at the time,
Right.
But as I look back, I think that these were people, in exiles having conversations about, how do they exist in this new territory, which is, not explicitly racist, but ambiguously racist. And
right.
how do
Sure.
they adjust?
Right. And I know you've written in other contexts about the difference between Southern racism and Northern racism. I think about that incredible second act of Pure Confidence, where suddenly we're in Saratoga Springs, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about down in Mississippi. Okay. So fast forward to 2008, when you're working on the play. What kicks off the writing of this play? I know you've written so much about history, but I tend to think of your work as about slightly more distant history, and this is much more close in. Why'd you start it then?
It was a commission for the theater department of Miami University of Ohio, and their what's called their Center for American and World Cultures.
Uh-huh.
And Miami University of Ohio is in Oxford, Ohio, and encompassed now in Miami of University of Ohio is a women's college called Western College, and it was at Western College that the volunteers for the Freedom Summer Project were trained to go down to Mississippi to start registering voters.
Oh my gosh.
That's where they did nonviolent training, and that's where the sort of dramatic episode, of course, the 3 civil rights workers that were murdered, Swarner, Cheney, and Goodman, were there then, at the beginning of that summer. And, all the trainees had sort of been, had been there, all the volunteers that were been there, all the white volunteers were there, and they were doing, learning about voter registration, doing things they could do. There were freedom schools, and of course there was the Free Southern Theater. There were lots of things, like the way the movement was then, the way that people organized the movement was, everybody is not going to be like a revolutionary or Che Guevara, but there was a kind of a structure that you could do whatever you could, right? All you have to do was show up. If you said, I don't want to do that nonviolent thing, and then they would find something for you to do. So
you could teach, you could organize, you could go and sign people up to vote, you could join the Free Southern Theater and go through the countryside.
It was like to way to organize people around their ambitions. There were really no distinctions of what contribution had value. And so the workshop was about sorting out those kinds of things. Wow. And getting ready to go down to Mississippi. And while that training was going on, in Nassboro, Mississippi, there had been a church was firebombed, right? About people that were involved in registering, right? And forgive me if I don't remember the exact context of why, but these 3 brothers, Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, they went down to investigate. I don't know what they thought they were going to do, but they went down to check it out. And
Cheney was African American, and Goodman and Schwerner white, right?
They were white, so suddenly no one heard from them, and there were anxiety. you know, and you know, I reemphasized they were getting ready to go down there, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I guess it needs to be prefaced with the idea of having all these white volunteers, right? It was run by SNCC, was to get the country to pay attention, you know, to the plight of Black people in the South, you know, particularly around voting, and particularly around Mississippi, that if they recruited these white volunteers to go down and do that and sort of face these dangers, then the nation would pay attention.
Yeah.
Right? And so the guys didn't disappear. The burnt car was found out, and then sort of like, you know, eventually, you know, the bodies, and this came when it was really just maybe a few days, no more than a week, before they were had planned to get on the buses and go down to Mississippi. So so this whole thing about like, well, we get the country to pay attention, you know, that became like a kind of horrible reality.
Yeah.
You know, so that then at the time, you know, the workers went like, oh shit, we can get killed. Right? You know, this is real, you know.
So
So the whole thing then was, you know, to ask people, did they still want to go?
right. So there's a kind of local story too with Oxford, Ohio, with the university there, that you're helping them kind of understand their place in that precise moment, as you know, the northern world is like thinking, oh, maybe if white people go down there and participate, it will draw attention in a way that nobody's been paying attention for the last 9 years or the last 90 years. And then they're waking up to the fact that there are real consequences of this. So anything else about the writing, anything you learned in that process with the students from 2008 as you were doing it?
Well, you know, I kind of, the story was really right there. It was there, like, you know, through my, you know, my own experience. You know, I was trying to like sort of amplify these events, and you know, they were, you know, and you know, what helped was what I knew about the sweep of like, you know, African American, you know, history, and you know, my own involvement, you know, in that. I mean, I was of age in that young thing, right? And so, you know, when that part of the story that I just said got kind of clarified to me, you know, I said, oh my God. So, you know, like in that room where they decided whether we're going to go or not, right? You know, the oldest person in that room was like maybe 25.
Right. The senior member.
Yeah, the senior member, the elder in that room was probably 25, right? You know, and they're like, you know, they're going to college, you know, and they're basically just kids, you know. I mean, you know, if they weren't doing this, they'd be trying to figure out who they're going to screw or what bar they were going to go. I mean, you know, they're naive, not having a clue kids who, both Black and white, have probably never had any meaningful interactions with each other, you know, which we're gonna, and then we're gonna share this thing,
Yeah.
you know, this extremely dangerous,
Yeah.
you know, catastrophic thing. So, you know, you go like, wow.
Yeah. No.
There's a lot of juice in there, and more that you know, you can't, you know, really tell.
Yeah.
There's a book which was very important to me. It was called Letters of Mississippi.
Mm.
And you know, it's letters that you know, mostly the white kids wrote to their parents.
Wrote back and forth. I've seen
Yeah.
some of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So you were reading that at the time when you were writing the play.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
So that raises a really interesting question. So, I mean, you sort of catch it right out of the gate with this mock training, or this, you know, with John play acting or, role playing the role of, you know, a kind of killer redneck, to Jimmy. And we don't know at first that, they're role playing. But, it really struck me thinking about this play this time that two of the three characters are white, mirroring Chaney, Schwerner, and Goodman, that there's a way in which it reads, at least to me as a white man, about as a learning play. Because, though Jimmy is on a journey that will lead to his death, but these two white characters kind of learn literally over his dead body. And Ellen decides to go in one way and John decides to go in another. So this context of being at that school, the women's college within Miami, did you have a sense of, was there something you were trying to bring the white students into? Was there, not that, not that.
What? It was certainly, it was much more a practical thing in terms of shaping a play in the face of this catastrophic event, right? Because women's college is now encompassed in Miami University of Ohio, which is in Oxford, Ohio, very conservative place. I wouldn't say it's an Ivy League school, but it's a very white school, right? And so, the theater department and the Center for American World Cultures, being very progressive, wanted to do this. They've even had reunions, which have been very interesting, of the volunteers and the SNCC workers from, that moment, So, so they wanted to do this play about that. And not just that, they wanted to, I've worked a little bit in the museum world.
Yeah.
Right. And this whole idea of, constructing stories in space, with objects, that have mana, meaning for us in terms of, historical events. And so they wanted me to stay there a semester and do that with two professors to create an exhibit.
Wow.
So the whole kind of thing was sort of very active and sort of looking at that history, which they're embraced. But the reality of, the environment is that there's not a lot of equity. It's not really integrated. The long and the short of it was there was no Black student who would be in this play. They didn't have any Black students in their class. So
Jimmy, did you?
Yeah, play Jimmy, right? Yeah, and so so just the notion of having three characters was sort of a way to deal with. Which was really kind of a lack of equity for whatever reason.
Yeah.
School, right, but that was sort of available, It could have been, populated with Black people, which would maybe. So I don't know what my thinking was sort of at the time. Maybe there would be more Black characters with more agency. But so my palette were these three people. That was something that was like a can-do kind of proposition, and so and then reading those sort of letters from Mississippi, outlining Jimmy's character, right in the first monologue, Jimmy says what he wants, what he wants to be. He wants to be like that little girl, right?
Sure.
He wants to be able to master himself, as a person.
Yeah.
So he's, he knows what Now the white people marrying Ellen, well, they don't really know what they, in the beginning, they learn what they want, but, they start off not really having a clue, like John has some, experience, but he doesn't really have as much self-awareness as he wants.
Yeah, yeah. It's
You
a
know,
little bit, it's a little bit of role playing for them.
yeah. Well, it's different, right? I mean, like, that, trying to the thing that I had direct contact with Freedom Summer when I was a student at NYU after that time, when I came from the South and being at Kentucky State, was, being at NYU. And that was after this moment, right?
Hmm.
That those, white students that went down to Mississippi, uh, at the end of that year, in that November, was the Democratic Convention in
Right.
Atlantic City, right? And what resulted from that Freedom Summer was, not only like did they get a lot of people to register to vote, but they had like a Black Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
Right.
Right. And they went to the convention in Atlantic City, and they wanted to have seats.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is
And
Annie Lou Hamer, who you talk about in the play as well, right? She's there.
right, that sharecropper, right? Johnson, whatever his thing was, he could not win the election without the Dixiecrats. And, they pulled one of these sort of political deals, which really just destroyed all these young people who had risked their lives doing this really idealistic thing.
Yeah.
And of course, the Black people were very angry, and the kind of multicultural unity of that moment was just destroyed at that convention.
Yeah.
Right. It was the Black people said, you just can't trust white people for anything. Fuck them. Even you guys who got beat and thrown in jail with us, even we're Black power. And, it was at that convention that Black power was born. Right? Mm-hmm. So when I transferred from Kentucky State and went to NYU,
was that Stokely Carmichael? Was he part of that Mississippi Freedom delegation?
Oh yeah, Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown. They were SNCC, right? I mean, that whole political strategy. They had before '64. They had done like a mock registration drive in Mississippi before. Mm-hmm. They were like a sophisticated political organization. And so they knew they could do it, but they could not register was the problem. Right. You know what I mean? Getting through, getting in that door at the courthouse. And so they decided, well, maybe they won't, maybe they won't beat us so bad if they're like white people down there with us.
Yeah.
Maybe people will pay attention that this, outrage is happening.
So we just have a few minutes left. So I just want to pivot because those events are so powerful and clear, and yet we're in another moment now that has a whole different kind of power and clarity, and that is much more implicating of the North as well. You're in Minneapolis, I know, and we've spoken, even in the weeks after George Floyd's killing. And so how does listening to the play now, how does it differ? What's it bringing up for you? I just want to say one little thing that it brings up for me, because I did feel, and I didn't know the background of the writing of the play at the college, but I felt like there is this sort of learning aspect, and there's that thing that we talk about a lot now, which is the additional burden that marginalized people have, marginalized and oppressed people have to train their oppressors, or to teach to teach the white people. And because I was thinking about that in a way I don't think I would have in 2008, how much this feels like it's about Ellen's learning and John's learning, even as it's about Jimmy's awakening. And that feels like a burden I wouldn't want you to have to assume if you were writing a play today. But I just wonder what feels different or the same to you hearing the play now?
Well, I want us to do the play as introducing me to the Illusions
Mm.
constituency as a Mellon writer, and I guess it was just simply that the play resonates today, and um, kind of what's sad about it. There's nothing different.
Right.
You know, that it's the same. It's a continuity, and I think some of a lot of my work, I guess it tries to point that out. The methods change and the illusions change, and it's not different. It's always I thought he had a gun. I mean,
Yeah.
it's there's no new excuse or whatever. And now we can see, maybe even white people can see how abusive it is. And all the decisions and calculations that are made by the pundits and stuff like that are really predicated on you know trying to persuade the body public of white people to be more humane than they actually are.
Yeah.
So, Jimmy is out of the play because, Jimmy knew he was going from the beginning, right? And maybe he reached it, when he died. But like he says in that scene, it isn't about them, right? And even though, white people appeal, black people appeal to white people are seeming or whatever, that's because what we have to do, right? But white people like to think it's about them, but we could really do without that shit. You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah. Well, I, you guys are just doing you've just done this one reading of the play now. Is there future for it?
I think you can click on it. This is doing our bit, for what's happening now. We want
It's a
people to
great moment for it to do it before the
yeah,
election.
we want people to encourage, like everybody else, to vote.
Yeah.
Do whatever you have to do, go as far as you have to go, wait as long as you have to wait, whatever. Vote, that's it.
Yeah. That's what it was in '64, and that's what it is.
That's what it is now. Yeah, exactly.
And hopefully the numbers are have swollen, and against your statement just now that I'm still digesting about how it really is the same.
Well, there is something that's different. There is something that's different about it.
And what's that?
To my mind, that there have been three significant multicultural movements towards American democracy, and that is the abolitionist movement, right? And then there's the civil rights movement, something that occurred over not a long period of time, and not really a lot of people actively engaged.
Right. I mean, we're talking about like 15 years, 14, 15 years, right?
Yeah, right. Less. Yeah. And now, with the murder of George Floyd, it is suddenly massively different.
Yeah.
The number of people are massively different. I think it's hope. I think there's a lot of hope.
Yeah. Out of Black Lives Matter following on George Floyd's killing. And
there have been a tremendous number of people who are not people of color who have been standing, putting their, bodies, on the line, to do what's right, and that is significantly different,
Yeah.
The rest of the narrative is the same, but that is significantly different, and
yeah,
that gives me, I believe in it.
Yeah.
I have faith.
I'm glad to hear it. I certainly do too. And I just think, I'm still sort of recovering, and I'm reading other people recovering from the stand back and stand by statement of the president speaking to the white supremacist Proud Boys 2 days ago, just 2 nights ago, not even 2 days ago, and the power of that kind of like the rallying to stand up against that. I read this amazing, what I thought was a really great suggestion this morning, and I'm just gonna say it from myself. I know we're not in proselytizing mode, but Aaron Landsman, a playwright and artist, posted about writing senators and congressmen to invite international peacekeepers to oversee the vote here, which I think is a kind of brilliant idea. I mean, you know, I know we have to end, but another thing that was so resonant to me about down in Mississippi and about that moment is the fucking government would not provide backup. The FBI was taking names, was working against the peace movement, and the government would not send backup until it got so bad. And the government now is in charge of the backup, but they don't want to back up the people. They want to back up the Proud Boys, do you know? And so how do we get the help that we need? Where does it come from to make sure that we have fair elections?
I think the light switch has just come on. You know, just as you said before, you know, the mechanism for this kind of oppression was always there. And, you know, the murder of George Floyd and Convent revealed that it was always there, right? You know, so, you know, it's not like, well, the system is broken. It's not broken. It's working exactly as it was meant to do. And sort of, you know, like, and so reform and dismantling means something in kind of entirely different, right? Yeah, you know, it's really curious now, you know, I think to a lot of Black people come from that period, you know, the FBI is such a model of freedom and justice when, you know, some of us believe that the FBI was created to surveil the other.
Yeah.
Right? You know, so, you know, we have to do this, and then we have to really get deep, deep, deep down into where we're coming from to find out what we want. This is just, we have to win this. And this is just a beginning.
Yeah.
It is a long journey to come.
Yeah.
And some of us feel different because we've been on that trail a while. Yeah. And we feel differently about it. And you know, given what's going on, I feel I have faith.
Let's end right there. I'm so grateful for you and your work and your faith, Carlyle. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your friendship, brother. I love you.
Okay.